Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is day 87, May the 29th, 2017, Monday, Memorial Day. Hopefully you guys are all off work today and enjoying that extra day off to sleep in and do whatever you're going to do today. For me, it's pretty much nothing. Stop by and say hi to Mom and Granny and get ready to go into work tomorrow and do it all again. Fortunately, it's a short week, so anyway, it should be a good week for us all. Of course, the last couple days, in fact, quite a few in the last week, the Seth Rich story has been fairly dominant, and it's dominated my videos, which are primarily supposed to be about the Obama surveillance, but there's just not been a whole lot going on there since the hearings last week. And the Seth Rich issue is connected because at the core of all of this in the investigation is how the Podesta and DNC emails got to WikiLeaks, and that's really tied to the surveillance. And all these things are going to fall under the purview of Robert Mueller. So there's just a few items that have been kind of gargling around that I want to touch on as just kind of a follow-up or review of the last week, some things that have been going on that have been overshadowed by Seth Rich. So let me go through just a few of those for you. First of all, something that popped up a few days ago, I didn't really say much about it, again, for various reasons, but it appears that Fusion GPS, which of course most of you, if you watch my TowerGate videos, you know all about Fusion GPS. They were the Washington, D.C. firm that does political investigations for political parties, primarily Democratic Party. They had worked with Christopher Steele to put together the dossier, but it now appears that the company, Fusion GPS, nor Mr. Steele, both who were involved in operations with foreign agents, both Steele working with Fusion and Fusion working with Steele. Remember, Steele is a Brit, Fusion GPS are Americans located in D.C., that neither of the two were registered with FARA, F-A-R-A, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. However, they were in fact collaborating and working together. Now, when you're doing this, you are supposed to register with FARA. Neither Christopher Steele nor Fusion GPS did this. And this is very interesting that this would get by John McCain, because of course it was John McCain who sent his right-hand man over to London to meet with Christopher Steele, get the dossier, come back, give it to John McCain, who would then hand it off to FBI Director James Comey. James Comey certainly should have inquired as to where this dossier came from, and at which point Comey himself should have looked into whether or not Fusion GPS or Christopher Steele were registered with FARA. Apparently Comey did not, or if he did, he didn't care. Of course, we know Comey was the gatekeeper. He is now gone, but he still has some things to say, and we'll be learning more about that in the future. Also, another thing that's been going on, Larry Klayman of Freedom Watch has filed an injunction to have the 47 hard drives with the 600 million pages from his whistleblower, Dennis Montgomery, who we talked about in a previous video. He wants to have all that information turned over to both the Senate and the House committees who are currently doing their hearings on all things Russia. Now, Larry Klayman gave this information to FBI 2 years ago, and it doesn't appear that Comey had any interest whatsoever in using any of this information or investigating any of this information, because clearly what is shown in Dennis Montgomery's 47 hard drives and 600 million pages are thousands and thousands of instances of surveillance on judges, politicians, private citizens, including unmasking and dissemination and the whole 9 yards. It's an entire smoking gun into itself onto the intelligence community and the Obama administration. In fact, it actually goes back even to the Bush administration. That's how far back this goes. Now, Larry Klayman says that he personally made the rounds in Congress, both in the House and the Senate, over the period of about a year after delivering that information to the FBI. And he says basically no one in the Congress, none of the people sitting on these committees had any interest whatsoever in looking into the information on those hard drives provided by Mr. Montgomery, the whistleblower. So this is basically an injunction which Larry Klayman of Freedom Watch is trying to put in place to force the independent prosecutor Mueller, as well as both houses of Congress, to consider the information contained on these 47 hard drives and 600 million pages of classified information, which clearly show surveillance all the way from private citizens all the way up to Supreme Court judges, members of both political parties, political candidates. This would include unmasking and dissemination as well, which is how Mr. Montgomery came into possession of all of this. And so this is something that's moving forward. Also, we have learned, and it has been confirmed in the past week or so, that the FBI, James Comey, shared with Susan Rice intel reports, which Rice unmasks and then disseminated, and then was leaked by someone to the media. So we now know this is an absolute fact, and we know that James Comey, and this is something Mr. Mueller will be looking at, based his FISA warrants largely on the dossier. Now, James Comey could right now himself, and this would explain why James Comey did not want to speak to the Congress or anymore, why he didn't want to attend the public hearings. It explains why he wants to have a conversation with Mr. Mueller, and it also explains why Comey would probably like to keep his mouth shut until he knows who his replacement is going to be, because he would also like to have a conversation with him. Comey wants to know, before he starts talking, he wants to know whether or not there is going to be a real investigation into him and his activities as FBI director, or whether he is going to be able to skate by. Because if there is an investigation into James Comey by Mr. Mueller in the process of doing his investigation, he will have to look into why James Comey was either negligent, not interested, or possibly complicit in A, illegal leaking, B, illegal unmasking, and C, illegal use of investigative resources for political objectives. These are three things that are very criminal in nature, in which James Comey, at the very least, had to be a part of it, even if it was unwittingly, how he approached this. But the fact of the matter is, we know that the FBI, and that would had to have included James Comey, would had to have probably known about this or been the decision maker, was providing the Obama administration with this intel that came from the FISA warrant that was based on the dossier. This is something that Mr. Mueller will be looking at, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Now, it is possible that what James Comey is doing right now is he is trying to decide exactly how to play his cards, because he right now, what he would like to do is he would like to whisper in Mr. Mueller's ear, so that Mr. Mueller would have a conversation with Jeff Sessions, who would then relate this to Donald Trump, that if in fact any efforts are made to try and investigate James Comey and find some wrongdoing with what he was doing, then maybe Mr. Comey will begin to talk about how the Donald Trump tried to persuade him to back off of the investigation into his dealings with Russia, or Russia collusion, or Flynn, or Manafort, or any of these other issues. So Comey may be sitting back, kind of being coy, trying to decide how he wants to play his hand. If he knows that he is, or if he's given assurance by Mueller or by anyone else at the Justice Department that he is not going to be the target of an investigation, then he will probably go away quietly and not say anything that would raise any more of a stir. However, if James Comey comes to believe that he may fall into the purview of the special prosecutor or the attorney general for future investigations of criminal wrongdoing, he might decide to make life hard on Trump and suggest that maybe Trump tried to convince him or persuade him not to continue his investigations. So James Comey is deciding on how to play his cards, and that probably has a lot to do with why he is acting the way that he is acting. He doesn't want to talk anymore until he speaks to Mueller, and he would probably really like to know who the new FBI director is going to be, and he would probably like to have a conversation with him so that James Comey knows exactly which way to play his hand. Now we are learning that Mueller will be looking into the Christopher Steele dossier. He will be looking into the Christopher Steele dossier because, as I mentioned in a previous video, Mr. Mueller understands that the source for the alleged proof of Russia hacking the DNC and Podesta in his emails, that this is being blamed on the Russians. But Mr. Mueller knows that this is based on CrowdStrike, a third party. And CrowdStrike, the third party, has not been able to even show proof or evidence of how they determined that the breach occurred. They don't know the exact technical process that occurred for that particular hacking. They was never able to find that. They were only able to find a couple of descriptions of individuals which they believe are or have been known in the past to be hackers, possibly working for the Russian government. But again, as I stated in a previous video, the CrowdStrike evidence cannot be entered into court in a criminal matter because they are not an agent of the government. They are not an independent agency. The only way that the Russian hacking could be entered into the public record in a court of law is if Mr. Mueller can prove it. And he would need to get a hold of the DNC servers, he would need to analyze them himself, and he would have to find proof from his investigators that leads conclusively, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the hacking came from Russians, and probably in this case, because the accusation is made that it was state actors, in other words, Putin or members of his government, and not just some individuals. This is what Mr. Mueller is going to have to show. This is why it's a very high bar, and probably why nothing will come out of it. But this is what Mr. Mueller is going to be looking at, and in order to do that, Mr. Mueller is also going to have to look at the FISA warrant, because it was the dossier which provided the FISA warrant that was used by the FBI to look both at the server in Trump Tower, and also it appears to get the authorization for surveillance around Trump's team, which was then conducted by the NSA. And of course, we've already discussed how when the NSA surveils someone, they do it on 3 levels, which means that they can actually surveil hundreds or even thousands of people based on one surveillance warrant. Also, if Mr. Mueller determines that there was surveillance, and of course we know there was surveillance on members of the Trump team or Trump himself or people connected to Trump by the Obama administration, Mr. Mueller is going to have to find what the reason was for this. And this is how he gets into more of the TowerGate issue, because he is going to have to determine that. He has been asked to look into that, and that will fall into his purview. So this is very important, and this is how he will find himself looking into the Obama surveillance and trying to figure that out. Also, Mr. Mueller is going to be looking into the leaking. He is going to have to find out who did the leaking, where it came from, and why, and whether or not it was connected to the Obama administration, and whether it was political. And if it was connected to the Obama administration, it was, of course, political. If it was, however, contained within the intelligence agencies, he'll have to determine exactly what the reason was for that. If all this is based on the dossier, then it's going to go very badly for the other team. And I believe that's exactly what's going to happen. I don't believe they're going to find any collusion. I don't believe that they're going to be able to prove Russian hacking. this most likely this investigation, as I said in a previous video, is going to backfire on the Democrats who pushed for it and who said they wanted it, because it's doubtful that Mr. Mueller is going to find evidence of Russian hacking that he is going to be able to prove in a court of law, which is the basis for the Trump-Russia collusion. It's more than likely that Mr. Mueller is going to be pressured now into looking at Seth Rich as a possible leaker. He is going to have to go down that road. He is going to have to go down that road now. There's just too much circumstantial evidence, and he is going to have to try to find the source of those leaks. And in fact, in order to do that, he must get his hands on them servers. And once he gets his hands on those DNC servers and finds out where the breaches occurred, and the fact that probably the resources he will have are probably a lot more skilled than what they had at CrowdStrike, they will probably be able to determine who may have been responsible for these breaches. And if it turns out that they were from the inside, it will not be very difficult to figure out if in fact it was Seth Rich. And once he gets that information, or someone on the inside, once that happens, he will then most likely, despite the DNC wishing otherwise, he will then be compelled to go start questioning Seth Rich's old co-workers at the DNC. About 20 to 24 individuals, I believe, worked in that same office where Seth Rich worked, in that department, and they will begin to learn more about what Seth Rich may have been disclosing to them, what sort of things he was finding, and we might learn much more about the motivations for why Seth Rich would have leaked the information. I believe that it's almost impossible for Mr. Mueller to try to find the source of the hacks or the leaks and not come to the conclusion that it was in fact leaks, and in fact it was Seth Rich. I don't see how he avoids going down this road, because once you open that door and you say that you are going to find the source of how the information found its way to WikiLeaks, you almost certainly will find yourself at the Seth Rich intersection, because it will simply be nearly impossible to find the proof of Russian hacking. And this can only be learned by analyzing those servers and by talking to people at the DNC. So this investigation may end up going down a road that the people who pushed for it may soon come to regret greatly. So this is pretty much a recap of what's been going on over the past week, some things that I haven't really talked about that have been going on. So I think that we're going to find out a lot more as this goes on. Again, I still believe what I've been saying for a very long time now, that this investigation will be much more than a cover-up or just a way to put all this to bed and pacify both sides and put the issue to rest. But I also believe that Donald Trump is not going to let go of it. Rand Paul is still pushing for finding out if he was surveilled. We still have the Seth Rich issue continuing to boil and fester. And ultimately, we still have the evidence of Susan Rice admitting that she was getting information from the FBI. We know the source of that was probably based on the FISA warrant from the dossier, and we know that someone was disseminating that information. And the real crime in all of this, there's a lot of crimes that Mr. Mueller is looking for, but there still is one crime that we know for sure of that absolutely did happen, and that was the leaking of the phone call with Flynn and the Russian ambassador to the media. And if the dossier was a classified document held by the FBI, it was leaked to BuzzFeed. So what may end up happening with Mr. Mueller's investigation is that it may be the leaking that opens up the wound here and allows him to move deeper and farther into the overall investigation, because so many of the other things he's looking at are nebulae. They're just smoke and mirrors, or things that can be nearly impossible to prove, or things that could be difficult to investigate. So I believe that if there is any thing in the overall investigation of the Mueller investigation that could produce some real fire, it's going to be when he gets into deciding or trying to decipher who was responsible for leaking information to the media. That's probably where the hook is in his investigation, notwithstanding the other things that are still out there on the periphery, like the Seth Rich situation and the general unmasking and things like that. Because again, we have Freedom Watch, we have Circa News, we have various other people using Freedom of Information requests, using other tools that they have in the private sector to try to unravel the surveillance issue. Because remember, it's much, much bigger than just the surveillance of Trump and his team, regardless of what it was based on. It is much bigger than that. It is the overall much larger question of during the Obama and even during the Bush administration, surveillance of judges and private citizens, unmasking and dissemination. So this is a much larger separate issue, and there's several ways that you can get to that as well. So anyway, this stuff is going to be going on for a long time, probably even beyond the 2018 elections, and we just have to be patient and follow it every day as it moves along. And at some point, who knows, maybe a whistleblower will come out. Maybe a source who's willing to be a named source, someone who is willing to appear in front of the Congress, or even more importantly, appear before a grand jury. Someone who may go to Mr. Mueller, and someone from the FBI or State Department or CIA or someone who's willing to go to Mr. Mueller, who's willing to go on the record and make a legal statement or a testimony confirming or giving some sort of testimony to one of many of the crimes that are alleged on both sides of the ledger. So again, this is very complex. There's a lot going on. We're going to have to wait out and see how it all moves forward. It will not happen quickly. In fact, over the next, between now and Labor Day, September, the Congress will only meet 28 times. Remember, these guys don't like to work. They're on a vacation right now. They get a 10-day vacation for Memorial Day. Then they'll come back and work a few days. Then they'll go on summer vacation, just like the school children do. None of us go on vacation. We work all summer long. Not the Congress. No, 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 no. That's when they go out and raise money. So anyway, they'll work a total of 28 days between now and Labor Day, and so you're not going to get much done there. Much of what Mr. Mueller is going to be doing is going to be staying pretty quiet. He may occasionally, from time to time, give a brief press conference, but you'll get no details or know really where the investigation is going. But things will be leaked. You can bet on that. There will be leaks that will come out, and there'll continue to be more things develop as we move forward, as it does just about every day. So anyway, thank you all for tuning in. Happy Memorial Day. I guess we all get back to work tomorrow and back to the grind, but we'll keep moving on the story. I appreciate all your comments and all your support, all those of you who are subscribing to the channel and sharing the videos. I do appreciate you, and you all have a good day. Goodbye.